For decades, the communities that live and work around the West Lake Landfill and Coldwater Creek have been exposed to nuclear materials through the soil, water, rain, air, and groundwater. In 1990, the landfill was named a Superfund site by the EPA. The EPA has taken too long to decide what to do with the radioactivities materials at the West Lake Landfill, and now the residents are suffering from grave illnesses. According to the West Lake Landfill's website, the landfill sits on 200 acres of land and is nearly 1 mile north of the juncture of 270 and 70. The Missouri River is located about 1.5 miles away from the northwest area that is commonly surrounded by commercial and industrial properties. The landfill is near Bridgeton, a town that has a population of 11,500 people. It is also adjacent to some residential neighborhoods, namely Spanish Lake with Coldwater Creek separating the properties. The West Lake Landfill is approximately 20 miles from downtown St. Louis. Robert Alvarez, who wrote the West Lake Story, An Underground Fire, Radioactive Waste, and Government Failure in 2016, which helps explain the science behind the environmental problems at the West Lake Landfill, states that in the beginning of 1942, the radioactive wastes were generated from Mallinckrodt Chemical Works in downtown St. Louis. They came mostly from uranium mine in the Belgium Congo. By the mid-1940s, the plant had run out of storage room and started trucking waste to the land at the St. Louis airport, where it was stored in bulk on the ground, open to the elements for almost 2 decades next to the Coldwater Creek. By the 1950s, a mountainous pile containing 133,000 tons of radioactive waste had accumulated. And in the 1960s, researchers for the Atomic Energy Commission's Mound Laboratory determined that the waste residues sitting at the St. Louis airport contained the largest concentration of thorium-230 in the United States and possibly the world. Thorium-230 concentrations were found to be some 25,000 times greater than its natural isotopic abundance. In 1962, the waste was bought and moved by Contemporary Metals to Laddie Avenue property in Hazelwood, Missouri, where the radioactive waste was deposited on the unlined ground, exposed to the elements. When Cotter Corporation bought the nuclear waste in 1973, most of the nuclear residues were sent to Colorado to be processed, and the rest were illegally dumped at the West Lake Landfill where it remains today. The 8,700 tons of radioactive waste was mixed with 39,000 tons of soil and placed on unlined land where they were used as daily top cover at the site. Radioactive materials were stored in bulk on the ground, exposed to the elements, and were left unattended. The workers that handled the materials were so highly exposed that they are given the benefit of the doubt when they are considered for federal compensation for the cancers that they have contracted. In the documentary Atomic Homefront that was directed by Rebecca Camissa, which discussed the effects of the nuclear materials on the land and the people who live around the landfill in Coldwater Creek, says that during the housing boom of the 1950s and 70s in the area around the landfill, homes were being built with the soil from the landfill to help construct the area neighborhoods. The soil that was used to develop the homes in the surrounding area of the landfill are contaminated with nuclear waste. Nuclear material sat next to Coldwater Creek, stored in bulk, on the unlined ground, open to the elements and unattended for nearly 2 decades. This creek runs throughout North St. Louis County and is a tributary of the Missouri River and is 15 miles long. The creek runs through the communities of Florissant, Hazelwood, Blackjack, Spanish Lake, St. Anne, Berkeley, Ferguson, and Bridgeton. The neighbors and children of nearby communities used to spend their summers enjoying swimming and playing in the creek. The creek is also near a golf course, some soccer fields, and some school districts. Throughout wind, rain, flooding, and groundwater, the creek has become contaminated, giving the nuclear materials a mode of transport throughout the surrounding communities. Sarah Fetnam, the author of Radioactive Waste in Coldwater Creek Increases Cancer Risk, says Federal Report, writes that radioactive materials from the landfill have caused cancer in people who live around the area. The Agency of Toxic Substances and Disease Registry releases a report saying that residents who were exposed to the area around Coldwater Creek had a higher risk of exposure to radioactive contaminants, thus a higher risk of bone cancer, lung cancer, or leukemia. The report also asked for the public to add the report until August 31st, 2018. The federal report states that the higher risk for exposure is in children and adults who lived near the creek in the 1960s through the 1990s. My question is what about the people who lived there in the last 30 years? Did the radioactive materials suddenly vanish? At least the acknowledgement of this would give relief through the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act for the residents who have suffered from this extreme mishandling of nuclear waste. The West Lake Landfill was listed as a Superfund site in 1990 by the EPA. They knew then that this landfill was a top priority, but why has it taken almost 30 years for the EPA to finally notice? There are people who are sick and dying due to the ineffective stance our government has taken on this. The West Lake Landfill is just as much a horrendous human welfare issue as it is an environmental disaster.
In 2015, the Chicago Tribune published an article about an underground fire that was nearing a nuclear waste dump in the West Lake Landfill. Safeguards like underground interceptor wells that are designed to trap gases are in place to keep the fire from reaching the radioactive debris. At the time of reporting, the fire was 1,200 feet from the nuclear waste. The fear is that should the smoldering fire reach the radioactive debris, it could release a deadly cloud of radioactive smoke. Of urgent concern for local residents is the smell created by the underground fire. Republic Services, owners of the landfill, have spent millions trying to resolve this issue by removing pipes that help to vent the smells to the surface and capping off areas of the landfill. According to the EPA's Brighton, Missouri fact sheet, samples taken from homes in the Spanish Village subdivision of Brighton in December of 2016 showed no Manhattan Project waste, meaning they reported no evidence that contamination from the nuclear dump site had affected people's homes. In 2014, the EPA investigated 100 soil samples from the Brighton Municipal Athletic Complex, with results stating that levels of lead-210, uranium, thorium, or radium were not found at levels that caused concern. Public and private entities continue to bicker over how to handle the West Lake Landfill's nuclear waste problem, all while denying any serious risk to residents exists. An accountant and economics professor who were raised near Coldwater Creek grew anxious at the number of their 1988 classmates that were developing serious health issues, particularly cancers. Using Facebook to track diseases, in a 2-year period, they documented 700 cases of immune system diseases and cancers in a 4-square-mile area. In August 2015, that number was updated to 2,725 cases of cancer and immune system diseases. For many of these cancers, their chances of occurring are 1 in a million. In 2014, the Missouri Department of Health found higher rates of leukemia and other cancers linked to radiation exposure. After decades of denials and avoidance, the EPA has finally decided to try and fix this problem. Their proposal is to remove 70% of the radioactive material and ship it out of state. Then they'll have a year and a half to assess the site, deciding where the waste will go and how to protect workers and the community. Republic Services believes simply capping the landfill with construction debris would be sufficient and cost a third less than the EPA's plan. In 2017, Missouri lawmakers rejected a bill that would have bought out residents close to the landfill. Now, residents are forced to stay in a place that may be slowly killing them by a government that promises this time they'll do a good job.